Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. This evening, I'm very happy to welcome Sharda Naidoo, a dear friend and a member of the Brahma Kumaris, who has been practicing meditation for a number of years, but also is an economist and has been also involved in now teaching. But Sharda had a conversation in August at some point, and there was a very positive response that people really want to engage in exchanging and just co-creating this whole thinking around the kind of collective consciousness that we need to create to define the future that we want. I think what we find ourselves in is a very interesting time in our history that it's like the world was forced to come to a pause, and a pause is always useful. As a meditator, that's something that I've always encouraged people, because when you take that moment of pause, it gives you an opportunity to look inward and reflect and refocus and redirect and reassess for oneself what is of real importance and value to one. So, very happy that Sharda could make the space this evening to be with us again. And so, warm welcome to you, Sharda. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratibha, and thank you to all the BKs and my friends who have taken the time to join us this evening. I'm pretty sure with this there's such a spectrum of people in the group who are joining us this evening. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion. And yeah, I think what makes somebody like me different in terms of Brahma Kumari's events is that I encourage much more participation, but also in that process of encouraging participation, what I'm recognizing is what we students of the Brahma Kumaris actually know, which is the extent of values and purity and good qualities that are embodied in all of us, in our souls, and soul consciousness is our primary practice as Brahma Kumaris. Um, I noticed that there are a few people who have joined us who are probably new to the BKs. To those of you who are new, a very warm welcome. Essentially, what the Brahma Kumaris is about is we're a world spiritual universities. We have centers in many countries around the world. Pratibha, am I right in saying more than 140 countries?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, we're a very universal school of university of practice. And our essential practices are meditation, and the BKs run courses in meditation as well as in inculcating and values, inculcating the values and the practices of meditation and study. So this discussion is a continuation of a discussion which started about 2 months ago. And when we started the discussion 2 months ago, the energy that was coming from the group was saying, we need a new consciousness. The discussion that we had 2 months ago, and I introduced it with by commenting that we've now, as humanity, received a second opportunity to build equality in the world. And you can call this my personal prejudice if you want to. I have no issue with that. But climate change, to me, has felt like it's an expression of the excesses of us as human beings, that we have not respected the earth, we have not respected the value that as much as we take, we have to put back. and we have to restore the goodness that the earth has given us. And that imbalance, as well as the inequalities in the world, it's been a reminder that this is an opportunity for us to pay attention to that equality and to put back as much as we take out from the earth. Now that COVID has come along, it's the second reminder of the importance of building that equality. And when we had our discussion the last time, this term, a collective and renewed collective consciousness came up. And so, having introduced what we discussed last time, I would like to open the discussion. You are welcome to raise your hands. I'm sure you all by now know how to use Zoom. There's a way of raising your hands. There's also the chat box. So if you wish to speak, please either raise your hand or put a note in the chat box that you would like to speak. Anybody would like to start by commenting on thinking around this new and this renewed collective consciousness that that we need to work on in the world? Any thoughts? Anybody want to share?
I can share. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Shanti. It's Anne.
What's your name?
Anne.
Anne. Hello, Anne.
Yes.
Please go
Hi.
ahead. Hi.
I just think it's been a fantastic time for us all, because not all of us who are working can always get to the centers morning and evening. And this has been a fantastic time to connect with the family. And it's been very thought-provoking, and it's been, a constant reminder at what we have to work on and what is happening in the world, and how important it is for us all to consider one another and consider the earth and do our very best. And I just think it's been an amazing time, and as much effort as one puts in, so does one then draw out the rewards. And I want to thank all the sisters who've put their wonderful time and effort together for all the talks and the workshops, and the meditations have been just beautiful. And I think it's been so advantageous for us all to think more about protecting our earth and considering one another and seeing the whole world as one. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Good.
Shanti.
Thank you. And I see Paula saying that, hello, Paula, it's nice to have you here. We need to take more responsibility for the other. Paula, may I ask you to just expand on that a little bit? About what are the ways in which you think we could take more responsibility for each other?
Hi, Sharda, can you hear me now?
I can hear you very well, Paula. Thank you.
When I say we need to take responsibility for the other, is that, somehow when you link people with the environment, you tend to link with issues of conservation. And conservation in itself, it's linked to, trees, animals, the air, and not like, linking people with people, and to understand, to make people understand that if you're not taking care of the other, the other will never take care of the environment. Yeah.
Right.
So because conservation is unfortunately de-linked with people, it's more linked with other issues rather than people.
Wow, that's a very interesting way of seeing it, Paula. Yeah, I just saw a little snippet with Sir Richard Attenborough, where he's saying people are now starting to get to realize that climate change is here and that we have to do things to take better care of the earth. But it's, yeah, that, you know, people's lives have become so delinked from the environment. That's quite a profound thought, actually. But yeah, it's also a statement about our time, isn't it? And about the way people live, that there's so little reflection and awareness of connectedness in you know, across humanity in the world, but also in terms of earning a living and how we use resources around us. Yeah, that's a very interesting and profound thought. Does somebody else want to share anything about this collective consciousness?
There's Sherry who's raised a hand. Sherry, would you like to share? Just unmute yourself.
Om Shanti, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, in terms of environmental factors, in terms of the usage of plastic, and all of us can make a difference in making sure that we recycle or we reuse our bags and things like that. But we're working from a place because we have enough to eat and drink. Area and a little few kilometers away from me, the people have strewn all the garbage in the road. It jams all of the stuff. And they're doing all of this because they have no food.
Right.
They have basic shelters, and they have, there's so much of poverty. How do I raise consciousness with people like this that have got nothing and tell them, well, you know, we have to live at a high level of consciousness? Please, I'd like to know what I could address this kind of issues and make a difference. Thank you.
Sherry, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about inequality. Yeah, I mean, firstly, to expect, and you know, in South Africa in particular, the extent of inequality is, you know, we've had the highest level of inequality since 1994, and we really haven't made a dent in terms of reducing inequality in this country. And we really have to take a strong stand around, you know, feeding people. There's a big call for a basic income grant in the country at the moment, but a basic income grant is okay, but it's a temporary measure. Yeah, it's coming up with longer term and sustainable solutions around livelihoods. Yeah, when you and I can have, or whoever's interested, I'm also doing a work program around building sustainable livelihoods in the country. But it really is a very big and serious issue. I see Anne has put a comment in here, and she says that unfortunately it's the big powers that are more interested in the financial gain. So the little that we each do individually is great, but it's not going to make a huge difference. The corruption took money that was for food for the starving people and stole it. Well, you know what? It's, yes, the corruption did that, but there's been a combination of corruption and incompetence in the country. And it's also an aspect of the collective consciousness that we as South Africans, but also everybody around the world, because yes, we have probably the highest level of inequality in the world, but there's inequality and poverty in so many places in the world. And it's something that we not only have to take a stand around, we also, you know, and it's not separate from our spiritual beings to say that we have a responsibility to hold governments to account, because that's the nature of democracy. It's also the nature of the connectedness with which we need to live. And that's also a part of, you know, our responsibility of being more aware of, you know, each other and what's going on with each other. So thank you very much for that, Sherry. Very valuable, and you're absolutely right. Thank you. Somebody else want to share?
Hema has a hand raised. Hema, would you like to share?
Om Shanti, good evening. Yes, my name is Hema. I've recently joined the Brahma Kumaris, and for me, my journey in trying to heal the world has been about my thoughts and not having any bad thoughts, negative, because to me, also your negative, bad thoughts about judging, criticizing is also polluting our wonderful world. And now I've been using this time to try and influence, well, you being a role model. Anyone talks bad about anyone in the family, no, we don't do those things. We are family, we love each other, or even neighbors. And I find that it has made a difference. People have stopped complaining about other people. This, it's bringing up more love. To me, it's also part of the way of going forward, of cleaning our air and watching on having pure, loving, compassionate thoughts for everyone out there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. That's a very interesting way to think about it. I'm going to tell you a little story about, how we can actually impact on what people think and how they behave, and, even their associations, without necessarily doing it in a way that that is unloving. So you can wait for the story, which has had me inspired since last night. So I'm waiting for the opportunity. But yes, Herman, I see your hand up. Please go ahead, Herman. Unmute yourself. Yep.
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much. I totally agree with your statement about inequality and poverty. Yet I don't think to kind of create an inclusiveness with underprivileged people is that difficult. Where I see the real challenges is a fragmentation, which we see within the level of decision makers. If you take America as an example, it is such a torn country, and increasing fragmentation on an international basis, which I see as a two challenges. Because you and I can, as I said, connect with underprivileged and kind of play our part if we want to. But how do we overcome the fragmentation by those in power, whether locally or internationally? Thank you.
I think you really put your finger on it. That's the real biggie that's facing us at this point, isn't it, Herman? Yeah. I see one person who's joined us, two people, one who's based in the US and one who actually has been living in the US for some time. Sudeep, I don't want to put you on the spot, but at some point when you feel ready, it would be really nice for you to make a comment on what it feels like being in the US at this point, but also whether you feel that, the will of the people is being heard in the US. That would be a very, that would be great to hear about. But any other thoughts while that anyone wants to share? Herman, the one thing I would ask you is, I would like to suggest that we are not powerless. And I think that it's worth reflecting on the fact that we are not powerless. And I don't want to believe that we are. Okay.
If I may make a statement with regard to that, I have been spending the last possibly 5 to 6 years on social change in this country. And I'm actually full-time engaged in that kind of domain. So I wouldn't do that if I would think it would be for the birds. I'm powerless and it's not going to change the system. I believe that awareness-based system change is possible.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, anybody else want to share your thoughts on building this collective consciousness? Okay, so maybe it's the moment for me to share this story. Last night, Christiane Amanpour interviewed a woman called Zenona Clayton. Zenona Clayton was an activist in the US, and she started working in the 1960s. And in 1965, she went to work with Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, and she joined them in their work with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And as part of her work with this conference, she got to work with the Mayor's Committee. And the Mayor's Committee consisted of a diverse group of people. And one of the people on the Mayor's Committee was a man called Calvin Craig. And Calvin Craig was actually a grand dragon in the Ku Klux Klan. And I had to look up what was a grand dragon in the KKK. And it's somebody who was a leader and who was a very high-ranking official in the KKK. And the mayor later confessed that he had actually informed Calvin Craig that he was getting Zenona Clayton involved with this work on improved cities. And there were these different communities that she was going to work with. And she was very clear and direct with him about her feelings, about what the KKK was involved with. She also very clearly came out and said to him, "You take children to these meetings. How can you influence your children in this way?" And she was always very clear and very forthright. But clearly, she never did that in an aggressive or an unloving or, she didn't do it as an attack on him. I get the feeling she rather did it as a reflection of, creating influence and doing what is best even for your own children. And within 2 years, this man, Calvin Craig, actually very publicly resigned from the KKK. And when he did, he actually quoted Zenona Clayton as the reason. It was her influence that actually caused him to resign from the KKK. And it really made him think very deeply about the Southern whites and their attitudes and their wanting to preserve slavery. And when Christiane Amanpour interviewed Zenona Clayton last night, she described her as the woman who actually slayed the dragon. But I'm going to put a reference in the chat box in a minute, because I then downloaded an interview with a magazine called Atlanta Magazine, where in 2011, the daughter of Calvin Craig actually contacted Zenona Clayton and said she wanted to visit her. And they set up this visit. And so Zenona Clayton said to you, "So what was it that made you actually, after all these years, still want to make contact with me and talk to me?" She said, "Because I believe you saved my father. My father was a changed human being. He had released so much. He only had love and care to give after he left the KKK. And I wanted to thank you." And she also tells other stories in this article about how Calvin Craig actually asked Zenona Clayton after he left the KKK. He said, "I want to meet with Dr. Martin Luther King." And Zenona Clayton communicated this. However, very sadly, before she could set up the meeting, Dr. King was actually assassinated. And the story goes that Calvin Craig actually went to the home of Martin Luther King, but he stayed outside the home and he didn't go inside the house. And Mrs. King sent a message to say he's actually welcome to come inside. However, he declined the invitation, but he stayed there. And when he died in 1988, and when he died, Zenona Clayton only found out on the day of his funeral that he had passed away. So she called up his wife and said, you know, had I known before that he had died, I would have come to the funeral. And she asked her, she said, would it have been okay if I had come? And Mrs. Craig said to her, you're actually the person who brought so much more love back and peace back into our home. Of course, you would have been welcome. But also, she then went on to tell her how much love and respect Calvin Craig actually had for Zenona Clayton. And you know, to me, that's really, there's so much inspiration in there about how two people who came from such very different perspectives, could have forged a friendship because they were friends during the years that they worked together. But more than that, there was so much respect and caring, but also the possibility actually penetrate the consciousness of a leader to that degree, because I can't imagine that a leader can walk away from a movement and that the other people who are in the movement are not going to be affected by the leader walking away, especially, you know, at a time like the turbulent 60s. So yeah, I was really moved and inspired by the story. And yeah, would anybody else like to comment or share?
I think one thing that touches me in this story as well is just that when we help people to become conscious of the other, it helps them heal in terms of their own being. Because
Right.
when we disregard anyone or dismiss anyone or reject anyone, in a kind of a way, there's a part of ourselves that gets rejected and gets suppressed as well. And so this thing, it's not just about healing the society as a whole, but integrated into that is the healing of the individual at the heart of it all. Because it was beautiful to see that at a personal level, what the change was and the quality of shift that was created at that personal level, so that it's almost like, you know, that helped to recognize the higher aspect of humanity and our own connectedness as we regard sacredness in the other as well. Beautiful.
Yeah. And you know, the other part of the story that's really appealing is that the mayor of Atlanta didn't shy away from putting people together of different persuasions and saying, this is the job that's at hand. And, you know, you all have to talk to each other and get on with building model cities. I recall a time pre-1994 where there were forums in this country, and the function of those forums were to get together and start planning and thinking what we were going to do, because, you know, we knew it was fairly clear that 1994 and the change was really imminent in South Africa. What's kind of sad, and maybe something that we need to think about and make a call for, is, you know, having local economic development forums and committees come together. Those things are supposed to be there. In the law, they are supposed to be integrated development plans, but they're not really happening to a very large extent in the country. But the power of coming together and discussing and looking for joint solutions is one of the routes to transformation. But also, when people do come together, the recognition of the commonality is often becomes the kind of the cohesive factors that actually take people forward and renews a healthier state of consciousness. Is there anyone else who, Sudeep, I see you've put your video on. Does that mean you would like to, do you feel ready to say something?
Sure, Sharda, Hariom. I just want to say, yeah, I thank you for sharing that story. It kind of resonates with a movie I watched many years ago, and it's a 1950s movie, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's called 12 Angry Men. And if you actually recall that, it was whereby these 12 angry men were actually supposed to make a decision about at that time a Black American boy who was supposedly, based on the court case, supposedly guilty of murdering someone at his home. And everyone who entered into the decision, the juries, had already a bias, a prejudice, a certain view already locked up in their head. And everything that was said by the prosecutors seemed to reinforce a view that this boy was guilty, except for one person, and that one person actually said. And because you had to have a unanimous decision, because it's about sending someone to death, this person said, well, I just don't know. That's all it starts off. The movie just starts off by him saying, I don't know. And everyone, all those other people had to convince him otherwise to say, you know, no, he's guilty, and give him all the, but he just said, I don't know. And every time he kept on saying, don't know, he built more and more doubt into everyone. And eventually, at the end of that movie, and it's a black and white movie, he went off not guilty. And you would see that the different characters and personalities and how they change and how their biasness and their unconscious biases comes out into it. And it's sometimes not to do with the fact that someone is either racist or whatever. In this case, it was quite clear that the guy who was the most stubborn about the whole issue was simply because that boy reminded him of his own son, and he was a white.
Right.
It had nothing to do with the color of his skin, but it was just the fact that he saw that boy in his own son and wanted to take revenge on his son because of the way his son treated his mom. So it was, these are the things that unfold, and I thought the power of that movie was because it just brought out someone being brave to say, I don't know, I think differently. And in this case, what you just shared, Sharda, was precisely what she did, you know.
Right.
She had a different perspective. And I think we need more and more people to come up saying, look, I have a different view, and this is the way. And that will kind of touch the very consciousness of people and say, yeah, maybe you may be right. But as time goes by, you build an ally of more people going with those doubts. What's happening now is there's more reinforcement onto an issue, but not many people are coming forward to bring those doubts to say, are we doing it right or not?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely right. It's about the coming together, firstly. It's about the listening, secondly, but also how we communicate and how we listen. Yeah. Sudeep and I have been part of a group in the International Association of Facilitators called the Social Inclusion Facilitators. And one of our colleagues, Reverend Basil Manning, has done extensive work on anti-racism and anti-sexism. And Basil regularly constructs scenarios where we then have to make choices. And what happens on a regular basis is we don't ask questions, further questions. We take at face value a few characteristics that are given to us, and yet there are other facets that, had we known, we might have made different choices. But the examination of our own prejudices is so very much a part of the raising of consciousness that we all need to engage in. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, Sudeep. I know I've been telling the story a couple of times recently about how I'm not really a corporate personality, but I was once headhunted to work at a very big South African organization. And on my first day at work, the vice president who headhunted me and who I was going to report to was waiting on the pavement for me when I arrived to start working. And he said to me, "Come with me, I'm taking you to a meeting." And the meeting he was taking me to was with all the other vice presidents in this organization. And the meeting was, it was 1994, and the meeting was about the RDP. The RDP was the Reconstruction and Development Program that we were meant to be implementing in South Africa from 1994 onwards. And here was I, in this group of mostly white men, I might add, and there we were, or they were, discussing the RDP. And I sat and I listened. And at the end of the meeting, the person who was chairing said, "Does anyone have anything to say?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Go ahead." And I said, "This meeting is being conducted as though the Reconstruction and Development Program is about those people over there. I don't believe that any change or transformation is going to come to this country by thinking in that way. That actually the Reconstruction and Development Program is about every one of us South Africans examining ourselves and the roles that we are going to play in building a country that fits with the values and lifestyles and opportunities that we all believe in and we want to see." So, we can't talk about those people over there. It's, we all carry the responsibility, but also it's about looking inwardly around that responsibility. I see there's a few interesting comments here that I would like to look at and share. Communities are networks of conversation, and the quality of our conversations will determine the quality of our relationships. Thank you, Herman. A very valuable thought. Absolutely. But also needing to talk to those with whom we normally do not talk to understand the other's views, but also with a strong understanding of social justice for all without prejudice. These are values that we really all need to inculcate. Anybody else want to share about how or what we do to build this collective consciousness? Any ideas on further practices? Some lovely ideas coming through. Okay. If I may then, I want to share some thinking from Marianne Williamson. Are you all familiar with Marianne Williamson? Marianne Williamson is an American, and I suppose one of the accurate ways of describing Marianne Williamson is that she's a spiritual leader and teacher, but a non-denominational spiritual leader and teacher, but also when the very first round of presidential candidates were put up in the US, Marianne Williamson was amongst those who actually stood, who wanted to be a Democratic candidate for presidency. I'm not sure if she actually believed that, you know, she stood a chance, but more than anything, I would hope that she saw it as an opportunity to really air the values and the teachings that she would like to put out there. And so this piece, she's called "The Issues Aren't Always the Issues." And what she starts off by saying is that life is made up of two dimensions, things on the outside and things on the inside. As people, we not only think, we also feel. We care not only about what is happening to our bodies, but also what is happening to our souls. And she talks about it in US terms, but, you know, she says America is not just having problems with what is happening to our economy, our environment, our educational system, etc. We have a problem with the psychological fabric of our country, as a low-level emotional civil war has begun in too many ways to rip us apart. And, you know, I think that many of us can look at our own countries in many different places in the world and notice that there are similar patterns in most of the world. In order to deal with that, we must address it on the level of our internal being. We don't normally associate politics with a deep level of our internal existence, but this is the 21st century now, and all that needs to change. People think politics is ugly, and it is true. Some of it is that. But there is something else to politics too. When we allow it to unfold, there is something noble and good. Our task in the 21st century is to transform our experience of politics, that we might help to transform our country. And when I think about the story about Zenona Clayton, you know, she and Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King were all politically involved, but the values and the politics for them was really very noble and good, as Marianne Williamson has said. We should participate in politics with the same level of consciousness as that which we bring to all of our most important and meaningful pursuits. Sorry, I want to reread that sentence. We should participate in politics with the same level of consciousness as that which we bring to all of our most important and meaningful pursuits. We should bring all of ourselves to it. We should bring our hearts and minds and deepest dedication to something bigger than ourselves. Politics is very, very serious business in a country as big and powerful as ours. When we get it right, it can be beautiful. But when we get it wrong, it can be a terrible thing. We are all responsible for that. With every election, with every campaign, we are deciding something extremely important. We are deciding what is possibly the fate of millions, the fate of the earth, even perhaps the fate of humanity. And if that is not a sacred change, I cannot imagine what is. This is a new time, and we must bring forth something new within ourselves in order to deal with it. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, as our case is new, So we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I was particularly, well, I would say not just save our country, I think, save ourselves from the damage that we're doing to the planet, but also the damage that we are doing to other groups of humanity, because it's ourselves that we need to save. But that word disenthrall ourselves was a fascinating word, and I tried to look it up, and there doesn't seem to be a meaning. But what I take from that is, how we get, it's about temporary, being enthralled, whether it's by things or careers or, pursuits, how we chase after things and how much energy we put into things. And that if we just step back, and when I think of the word that keeps coming up in terms of the practice of the Brahma Kumaris, that if we become detached observers, that there is so much more that we will see, and so much more that we will do, and that so much more we will share, but also that we will restore that purity that really is who we are as souls, when we actually become the detached observers and disenthrall ourselves from the pursuits that we end up becoming caught up in, and the distractions, so much so that we don't even become really aware of the damage that we're doing to each other, to ourselves, and to the planet. We have a few minutes left. Is there anyone else who would like to share any thoughts? Please raise your hands or put a comment in the chat box. Okay, if nobody wants to share, I would like to share with you one final thought that I have had this on my wall in my office for at least 5 years now. I think it was around the time that I discovered Caroline Myss and her work, and I read my first Caroline Myss book, and I will share with you in a second this thought, and I've kept it here on my wall to re-inspire myself every time I see this quote. And I see Anne has shared a lovely thought here, that the more people can be kind to one another, the better. Kindness and purity do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So I would, let me read this quotation from Caroline Myss, and it's headed Defy Gravity. She says, remind yourself each day of your life. This day will never come again. You will never see the same sunrise or sunset. You will never sit at the same table twice with the same people in exactly the same way. Such tiny realizations are also the most profound soul awakening. You have resources yet to be unleashed. Make bold, outrageous choices. Live as though you have the power to change the world, because you do. Thank you so very much. Pratibha, can I ask you to play us a little piece of music and then lead us through the final meditation?
Yeah, sure, Sharda. I think those words that you've shared were very beautiful and inspiring. And so it's an opportune time now just to absorb that and to take it within ourselves. So I invite you to just sit comfortably and just take in a deep breath. And as you breathe in deeply, just allow yourself to relax your body. And as we just allow the body to relax, we draw into a quietness within ourselves. And through that quietness, just begin to return to a place in ourselves that is still and peaceful. And returning to this place of internal stillness centers us, and it anchors us into that part of ourselves that is true, untouched by the world, sacred, and authentic. Because when we come to our state of mind that's peaceful, we are at our most natural state. And reconnecting to this part of my being awakens in me the deeper essence of who I am and what I am. That I am consciousness, I am light, I am energy. And in this awareness, it extends beyond myself. That I begin to see and sense that all life is energy. And that we are all deeply interconnected with each other. That my peace resonates with your peace. And that I cannot feel whole and full until and unless I see you, and I see you with love. And so just bringing back this awareness creates a beautiful feeling of oneness, creates a very powerful sense of belonging, and a collective feeling that it's together, it's with each other, and that everyone is needed in creating the future that we all long for in our hearts. Because we all hold one dream, and it's a dream of love, and it's a dream for joy, and it's the dream of well-being of all life. And in this sacred connectedness, we feel held and embraced by a divine light, by a divine love. That we all held together as a sacred family, all linked to one higher source, all belonging to one. So in this moment of silence, just hold this feeling of connectedness and know that as we hold this awareness and feeling together, we heal together and we co-create together, and that anything's possible when the highest in us comes together. Thank you. So I'd like to just say thank you to Sharda for this facilitating this evening. I think it was a beautiful learning experience for everyone. And it's just wonderful that we can engage in this kind of way of just exploring what we do feel deeply in our hearts and how we can bring together our experiences, our knowing, our learning, and create something beautiful together. So thank you very much, Sharda. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank everybody for being here. It's been another wonderful sharing experience, and I wish us all the very best, especially over the next 2 weeks. The world is coming to a turning point, and I think we can all hope for the best and know that whatever will happen, we will do our best. We know that. Thank you all so much. All the best to you.